man taps the glass of a small bank in Dublin. A tired American tourist steps inside holding $100. Not a roll of cash. Just one bill, the last clean promise in his wallet. He is jet-lagged. He slides the bill across the counter and waits. The teller looks at the note, then at his face, then back at the note. Her eyes do not say you are a criminal. They say I have seen this problem before. She pushes the bill back, gently, like it might stain her drawer. No test pen. No machine. No debate. We are not taking these today. For a second he feels the sting of being judged. Then he understands. The teller is not accusing him. She is warning him. She is looking at him like someone who might walk back into the rain with money that no longer counts as money. That is the moment the story turns. Because if a $100 bill becomes too risky to accept, in a normal bank, on a normal street, the problem is not one tourist. The problem is the quiet contract that holds the world together. The agreement that paper equals value. The Supernote. A few years earlier, a seized 100 lands in a lab. Every quick test says genuine. The paper feels right. The ink behaves right. The security features look right. But one technician does not move on. He has trained his brain to notice the smallest wrongness, the blur where it should be crisp, the drift that happens when a real system prints billions of notes. Something in his gut whispers that this one is different. He turns the microscope higher, again. At 400 times, his stomach drops. The bill is not flawed. It is corrected. The tiny imperfections real currency naturally carries, the slight variation from plate, where the soft randomness of mass printing, they are gone. Lines that should soften are razor clean. Details that should wobble are perfectly disciplined. Better than real. This counterfeit does not just imitate reality, it edits reality. And once you see that, you understand the danger. This is not a basement printer. This is an operation with patience, budgets, and time. Because money is not metal. Money is not paper. Money is trust. Trust that a stranger will accept what you hand them. Trust that a bank will honor it. Trust that the system stays stable long enough for your life to make sense. Trust is the product. So when fake becomes safer than real, something breaks first. Not the ink people. They hesitate. They doubt. They start treating each other like a risk. Now rewind to Ireland, before tellers started pushing bills away. Dublin, late 1980s. A man named Sean Garland is running out of money. Not the kind that cancels a vacation. The kind that turns networks into liabilities and loyal friends into missing phone calls. He is a political operator shaped by decades of underground work. For years, support came through channels that felt permanent, quiet transfers that kept the machine alive. Then the pipeline dries up. Phones stop getting answered. Promises turn to silence. And Garland watches the world that funded him begin to collapse. Most people would scale back. Disappear, start over. Garland looks for an angle. If there is not enough money worth stealing, manufacture money instead. It sounds insane until you remember that the world runs on belief, and belief can be engineered. Somewhere out there is a partner with the power to print perfection at scale. And if that partner says yes, the $100 bill in your hand will never feel the same again. Garland does not need a friend. He needs a machine. He needs a partner with 3 traits that almost never exist in the same place. Isolated enough to ignore the world. Hostile enough to enjoy humiliating America. Capable enough to do what no street counterfeiter could ever touch. He scans the map of human power, and the options fall away one by one. Most countries fear consequences. Most governments have too much to lose. Most regimes leak secrets, because people talk, they brag, they break. But one nation sits in the dark like a locked room. North Korea. A country that lives behind walls, where silence is policy and fear is discipline. A place that needs hard currency the way a starving body needs oxygen. To buy what sanctions deny, to pay for weapons, to keep elites loyal, to keep the lights on where the cameras can see. In Pyongyang, money is not an abstract concept. Money is survival. So the logic becomes cold and simple. Garland needs dollars. North Korea needs dollars. The dollar is accepted everywhere. The dollar is the perfect weapon, because it walks through borders wearing a smile. Now picture the route. Dublin to Moscow. Moscow to Beijing. Beijing to Pyongyang. Each flight strips away another layer of normal life. The signs change, the languages change, the rules change. By the time he steps onto North Korean tarmac, the air itself feels different, heavier, like the country is holding its breath. The streets are wide and strangely empty. Concrete blocks rise without warmth behind their windows. Loudspeakers hang over corners, broadcasting devotion, not news. Faces look forward, not sideways. In places like this, even curiosity can be dangerous. And somewhere inside that controlled quiet, the meeting happens. A windowless room, a plain table, no casual conversation, no small talk about weather. Just a question hanging in the air, one that would sound like an act of war if anyone outside that room heard it. Garland lays out the pitch in a calm voice with a Dublin edge. Print flawless $100 bills using state resources. Industrial facilities, engineers, chemists, engravers. Then let my network move them through Europe and beyond. We split the profits. If anyone gets caught, you deny everything. You call it a rogue smuggling ring, a criminal problem, not a government policy. And the people across the table do not laugh, because they understand something Garland understands. This is not about stealing money from a bank. This is about creating American value without American permission. A quiet war, fought with paper instead of bombs. Only partner. Quiet war. But there is a reason this idea should be impossible. You do not just print 100. A $100 bill is not a piece of paper. It is a compact security system designed by a nation that has been fighting counterfeiters for generations. Texture you can feel. Details you can barely see. Ink that behaves like a trick of light. To copy it, you need more than criminal ambition. You need a factory that can mimic the confidence of a superpower. And here is the hard truth. You cannot arrest a country. You cannot handcuff a regime behind its own borders. But you can follow the pipeline. Because no matter how powerful the printer is, the product still has to move. It still has to touch the outside world. It still has to pass through human hands. And that is where the invisible war leaves a trail. Deep inside a guarded facility, the work begins like a night shift that never ends. White coats, bright lights, heavy doors that close with a sound you feel in your chest. The kind of place where nobody asks why, they only ask how fast. And the people inside are not the cartoon version of criminals. They are technicians, engravers, chemists, engineers. Some of them are proud of their skill. Some of them are terrified of failure. All of them understand the same thing. This is not a hustle. This is a national mission. Press. The first battle is the one your fingers can sense before your eyes ever get a vote. Texture. Real American money has raised ink. When you rub the portrait, it does not feel flat, it grips back. That texture is a signal, a tiny handshake between the bill and your skin that says, I am real. To copy that, you need industrial force, not consumer printing. You need pressure that turns ink into relief, and plates engraved with microscopic discipline. When the machines run, the floor vibrates. The air smells like metal and oil. Men and women stand watching sheets roll through, knowing one wobble can ruin an entire run. A $100 bill is supposed to feel ordinary, but in that room, it becomes a manufactured miracle paper. Then comes the second battle. The one that decides whether the bill lives in the world or dies in a teller window. Paper. People call it paper, but it is not the paper of books. It is a material designed to survive sweat, pockets, rain, time. It bends differently. It folds with a memory. It carries tiny fibers that do not belong on normal stock. This is where counterfeits usually reveal themselves. Not in the headline features, but in the quiet tactile truth. A cashier who has handled cash for 10 years can feel a lie in 1 second. So the goal is brutal. Make something that feels identical in the dark. Imagine the pressure on the workers tasked with that. Not pressure from deadlines, pressure from consequences. The kind of pressure that makes people lie to their spouses about what they do all day, because the truth is not safe to speak. Ink. And then comes the third battle, the one your eyes trust without realizing it. Ink. On a real 100, a number shifts when you tilt it. A small visual magic trick that triggers belief. It is not just color. It is a signal that the bill carries authority. When investigators talk about supernotes, this is one of the details that keeps coming up, because it is the kind of feature most fakes cannot mimic convincingly. It is the line between something that looks close and something that becomes invisible inside the system. So in that facility, they chase the same effect. They tune, they test, they adjust. They aim for a bill that passes in a casino, in a bank under fluorescent light at a currency exchange, in a hand that is moving too fast to hesitate. And here is the hook that turns this from crime into nightmare. The fake did not fail the tests. It passed them too well, too perfect. Because real production has a heartbeat. Plates age, lines soften. Tiny variations happen across millions of notes. That imperfection is normal. It is part of reality. But the Supernote, at least the ones that made investigators stare longest, looked corrected. Cleaner than a real bill, sharper than a real bill. A counterfeit that seems to have improved the original. Under magnification, the difference is not a mistake. It is a signature, the signature of a system that has time, discipline, and obsession. A fake that does not look cheap, a fake that looks proud. Press, paper, ink too perfect, and if a bill can fool the lab, it can fool the world. But printing is half the war, moving it is the other half. Once the bills exist, the real danger is not the ink, it is the movement. Because the world is not a single room, it is a chain. Airports, borders, counters, vaults, hands that touch cash without thinking. Systems built on speed, not suspicion, and every system has rules. Rules are meant to keep order. Rules are meant to prevent chaos. But rules also create blind spots, exemptions. Quiet corridors where things pass without being examined too closely, because the world has decided it must keep moving. That is how a counterfeit becomes a ghost. Not by being hidden in darkness, but by walking through normal life wearing the face of normal money. No footprint. Picture an airport at night. You do not need to see the details, just silhouettes. A tired courier, a rolling suitcase, a line of travelers shuffling forward. Fluorescent lights, security announcements, the soft hum of routine. That routine is a kind of anesthesia. $100 bill slides from one hand to another. No story attached, no origin, no warning label. It is just money, the most socially accepted object on earth. And once it reaches the surface world, it does not stay in criminal hands for long. It moves into places that are built to absorb cash like lungs absorb air. Currency exchanges, casino cages, retail drawers, bank deposit bags. Here is what makes this uniquely poisonous. High-quality counterfeits do not explode like a scandal. They dissolve like dye in water. One bill here, 10 bills there, then a stack, then another stack. Each one clean enough to pass, ordinary enough to forget, convincing enough to become invisible. And at first, nobody notices. Because nobody wants to notice. A teller does not want to tell a customer their money might be fake. A manager does not want to shut down a busy window. A casino does not want to accuse a high roller. People choose the easiest story, the one that lets the next transaction happen. But then something changes, not in a lab, in human behavior. A rumor spreads, quiet at first. A few strange bills, a few awkward moments at a counter, a few managers telling staff to be careful. Then the rumors become policy. A sign appears behind the glass. We do not accept $100 bills. Trust cracks. Now think about what that does to a person. You are a tourist far from home, holding cash you worked for, cash you believed in. You step into a bank expecting relief, and you get refusal. You feel embarrassed, then angry, then scared. Not because you did anything wrong, but because the world just told you the rules have changed and nobody bothered to warn you. The cashier is not cruel. She is protecting herself. She is protecting the business. She is protecting the bank from a threat she cannot personally solve. This is how trust fails in public, not with panic, with hesitation, a pause before accepting money, a second glance, a quiet question to the manager, a drawer that closes a little faster than it used to, and that hesitation spreads. Businesses become cautious, banks become rigid, cash becomes a question mark. People who never cared about security threads and micro details suddenly feel exposed, because they realize they were never verifying money. They were trusting the system to verify it for them. When trust cracks, society changes behavior overnight, and that is the true damage. Counterfeiting at this level is not only theft, it is a stress test on belief. It forces ordinary people to carry suspicion in their daily lives, to look at each other and wonder if they are holding a lie. In the end, the bills do not just move through the economy, they move through the human nervous system. And once the problem becomes visible, authorities face an ugly limit. You cannot arrest a country. So you do the next thing, the only thing. You follow the pipeline. By the time the supernotes start showing up in the real world, the government faces a problem that feels almost humiliating. You cannot bomb a printing press you cannot find. You cannot subpoena a country. You cannot put handcuffs on a regime. So investigators do the only thing they can do. They go after the pipeline, operation. One of the major efforts becomes a long undercover campaign, tied to names like Operation Smoking Dragon and Royal Charm. Not a single raid, not a quick arrest. The kind of case that takes years, because the enemy is not one person. It is a system. And here is the part that sounds dirty, because it is. To catch them, agents had to become the buyers. They step into the underworld wearing a mask that has to hold up under pressure. They adopt new names, new backstories, new phone numbers that disappear. They sit in parking lots at night, waiting for a car to pull in. They make small talk with people who smile like friends while calculating the distance to the nearest exit. It is not glamorous. It is exhausting. They go home and cannot tell anyone what they did today because the truth is classified and the lie is safer. They miss birthdays. They miss holidays. They learn to keep their face calm while their heart is sprinting. The network. Slowly, deal by deal, they start mapping the web. A controlled buy here, a meeting there, a shipment that looks ordinary from the outside, a package that contains something far from ordinary. In an office somewhere, an evidence wall grows, photos, arrows, names, locations, connections. A living map of how money and contraband move through the world. It starts small, then spreads until it feels like it could cover the entire room. And what they learn is a truth people rarely want to face. Modern crime is not chaos. It is logistics. The same routes that move counterfeit currency can move cigarettes, narcotics, fake pharmaceuticals. Different payloads, same corridors, same couriers, same people who make a living turning borders into suggestions, so the operation tightens. Surveillance teams follow cars through long nights. Wire recordings capture coded conversations that sound casual to outsiders, but to investigators feel like a language made of hints and fear. Forensic accountants track flows that vanish into shell companies and reappear somewhere else wearing a clean suit. Then the moment comes when the government finally moves. Container yards, warehouses, coordinated raids, evidence tables lined with seized goods. Stacks of cash that look like money until you remember the entire point is that you cannot be sure. And even then, the emotional tone inside law enforcement is not celebration. It is relief mixed with dread. Because busting a network is not the same as proving the source. It is not the same as touching the people who printed the notes in the first place. If sovereignty is armor, then the state is untouchable. So the focus shifts to the human link. The one person who can be arrested in an airport. The one person who can be pressured in a courtroom. The one person who bridges the distance between a nation and a street corner. Garland. Sovereignty is armor. When he finally appears in handcuffs, it should feel like the end. That is how most stories work. The mastermind is caught, the credits roll, justice feels clean. But real life is not clean. Real life is jurisdiction. Garland is older now, frailer. He does not look like the villain people expected. He looks like someone you might see feeding birds in a park. And that image matters, because courtrooms are not just about evidence. They are about perception. They are about sympathy. They are about whether a nation believes an old man should be shipped overseas to die in a foreign prison. His defense becomes a strategy, not just an argument. Health, fragility, humanity. A portrait of a man too sick to travel, too weak to endure harsh punishment. And somewhere in the background, politics hums like static. Because in Ireland, history is not ancient, it is personal. Names and movements carry weight. Old loyalties still pull on public opinion. For some people, Garland is not a criminal. He is a symbol. For others, he is a convenient villain. For many, he is complicated. And complicated is exactly where legal fights survive. So the case becomes a maze. Court dates, appeals, delays, borders that look like lines on a map, but behave like walls when you need cooperation. One jurisdiction hands off to another. Procedures slow everything down. Every week that passes is a small victory for a man who understands time. And then there is the moment that makes people furious, because it feels like a trick pulled in daylight. He is granted release while the legal battle continues. He walks out, breathing the open air. He crosses back into territory where the rules shift, where the politics shift, where extradition becomes harder. Later, when the process reaches its crucial moment, the result is the kind of decide. If you want to know what the world does after a story like this, do not look for a statue. Do not look for a memorial. Look in your wallet. Legacy. Because the real aftermath of a perfect counterfeit is not a courtroom victory. It is a redesign. A quiet admission that the old design could no longer carry the weight of trust. That is why the $100 bill changes. Not to make it prettier. Not to make it feel modern. To make it believable again. When people lose faith in what they can hold, governments have to rebuild faith with engineering. Security threads, micro details, color shifts, layers you will never fully notice unless someone forces you to. And most of us never think about that work, because most of us just want money to be boring. We want it to work the way oxygen works, always there, never questioned. But after the Supernote era, boring was no longer a guarantee. So the bill becomes a message, a ribbon woven into the paper that seems to move when you tilt it. a visual promise designed to calm your brain before your doubts can speak. Features meant to survive the hands of tourists, the counters of casinos, the fluorescent glare of exchange booths, the speed of daily life. Believable again, and that is the strange human truth. $100 is only valuable if strangers agree it is. If the world accepts it without flinching. If a teller does not push it back across the counter. When that flinch appears, everything has to evolve. But here is where the story stops being about paper. Because the skill that mattered most was never printing. It was forging trust at scale. Once you understand that, you see the timeline clearly. When ink became harder, they moved to interfaces. Paper to code. Money went from something you can feel to something you can only see. Your balance is a number on a screen. Your transfer is a click. Your confirmation is a familiar-looking button that asks you to trust what you are seeing. That is the new battlefield. In the digital world, you do not need plates and presses. You do not need paper mills. You do not need ink that changes color. You need access. You need deception. You need one moment where a human being believes the interface is telling the truth. And if a regime learned how to counterfeit trust with paper, imagine what it can do in a world where trust is mostly invisible. That is why this story matters right now. Because the Supernote was not the end. It was a prototype, a rehearsal for a future where the money never touches your fingers at all. Next chapter. So here is the question I want to leave you with. If a perfect fake can move through the world like a ghost, how many perfect fakes are moving through our digital systems today? If you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe to Sins and Lessons. Because every week, we pull at the same thread. The systems that feel normal, the loopholes nobody notices, the human instincts that get exploited. And if you have a $100 bill anywhere nearby, take it out. Tilt it. Watch the security features move. And remember, the value is not in the paper. The value is in the trust. See you in the next chapter.